You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you have not already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky.
This week, we welcome Dr. Diana Robbins, director of the AJ Drexel Autism Institute and creator of the MChat, an online tool utilized for early autism detection. We're excited to share that ABS Kids now offers the MChat free on our website, helping caregivers to take a key first step towards diagnosis and early intervention. Join us as Dr. Robbins discusses the science behind the MChat tool, supporting development, and the future of autism research.
Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Diana Robbins.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Well, I love to give a little bit of background because I think with autism and with research and with the passions that come with that is that we all have some background story, some history to how we got into this and where that drive came from. So what sparked your interest in the field of autism?
You know, it's a funny story. I was a high school student and I was looking for a meaningful summer job rather than just working at the local takeout junk food place. And I happened upon a preschool for kids with special needs, broad variety. It wasn't an autism school, and they wouldn't hire me, but they let me come and volunteer. And so my summer before my senior year of high school, I was in this classroom that had 3 kiddos on the spectrum and 4 or 5 kids with other developmental delay kinds of issues. And something just caught my attention. I got really interested. I started reading. I went off to college, and every chance I could funnel a term paper topic towards autism, or I got a professor to do a directed reading with me when he didn't know much at all about autism. And so it got fostered, but it was honestly those 3 kids that I first met that sparked my interest.
I think it's so funny is that I hear those stories all the time, and my daughters right now are in high school and they're living your same experience. Hopefully they become researchers in their future life, but you make that connection. You see the just the joy, the happiness, the abilities of somebody and how they're experiencing life. And if you are an open-minded individual, it's almost like, wow, I want to learn. I want to see your perspective, and I want to be a part of that experience. One of the components I'd like to touch on today is really understanding the why to early detection. And as much as like that passion of everybody's personality grows throughout the years, and we become who we are. With early detection with autism, it sounds like that is a very key part of a developmental milestone to be able to start to develop all those skills that bring about our personalities. So what is it that's really important for that critical piece of a child's development?
Right. I think that there are a few aspects that come together. So the first is that our brains are more plastic, meaning that they're more open to learning the younger we are. Now, we're not hopeless, those of us who are in our 50s or whatever, decade you're in. We just don't learn as much and as quickly as when we were younger. And so harnessing that brain power to learn, that desire to absorb and grow while kids are as young as possible is really critical. The other pieces that I think are really important are some of the earliest skills that we're teaching kiddos on the spectrum that other children around them might be picking up without some extra devoted time or extra effort to teach them specifically, are the skills you need to learn other things in the future. And so teaching kids how to learn and how to engage is going to open lots of doors for them in the future. The third piece is whenever we're looking at a child who might not be learning and growing in quite the same way as their peers, we look at how far the gap is, how wide the gap is between where the child is right now and where you hope the child will get in order to foster their future independence and their building that skill set for them. And so if you start while children are very young, there's a smaller gap to close. And so it's less challenging to help them catch up to their peers than if you wait several years until they're older. I will say there's very solid research now. It was speculative, 25 years ago, but now it's really solid that the earlier you start targeting the kinds of communication and social engagement skills that open the door to all of these future learning opportunities and future gains towards independence and towards autonomy, the better. And so the one other piece I would highlight in there, so this is important globally across all kinds of skills, but there does seem to be something unique about language. And children who develop fluent language before the age of 5 or 6 have far more opportunities. And so again, the closer you get to that critical window, if you will call it, closing, the less time you have to work on those skills. So if you start when kiddos are 1.5 or 2 years old, you have that much more time before their brain flexibility starts to lessen a little bit, and you're left with more challenges and fewer opportunities.
Yeah, and with earlier being better as far as that recognition, for a lot of those core symptoms for identifying autism is that they become so much more prevalent over time if somebody doesn't have some supports to be able to develop some of the skills, and those characteristics sometimes become barriers. For those younger kids, we've seen a movement to be able to identify younger and younger, earlier in their development. And it sounds like it's really important, not only for that language piece that you're talking about, but I would imagine almost all these skills start with that social engagement of wanting to be a part of a social world. Even language is part of that social world. I want to be able to communicate with those around me. I want to be able to engage. What are those? What are those core pieces that you'd be talking about when you're saying, before we get into the M chat specifically, but when you're talking to a family and saying, you know what, these are the core areas that I'd just be aware of as your child's going through development in general, whether they're neurodiverse or they're neurotypical. It's like, these are the areas that I just watch for.
Right, right. I think the major things to look for are social engagement and social communication. So human beings don't live in isolation. We live in community. And if we don't know how to connect to our community, it can be incredibly lonely and scary. And we can't lean on others to support us if we can't tell them what we need for support. And so when we think about toddlers, so toddlerhood is the age at which autism signs start to emerge. So it's not that it's just happening. There's something that's different about the way their brains are developing from before they were born, but it's when it becomes evident to those of us who are looking at how children develop. So you can't tell at 3 months and you can't tell at 6 months if a child is on a trajectory that looks like they're developing autism or not. But by that time, they're about 18 months old. And in some kids, it's actually younger. In some kids, you can tell by the first birthday.
Wow.
Just not consistently. What you're seeing is differences in the way they're engaging with the world. So instead of tuning into people and paying a lot of attention to people's faces and voices and actions, they're more tuned into parts of the environment that aren't necessarily vehicles for learning. And the people are the vehicles for learning. And so what we look for in very young kids are simple ways of engaging and communicating before they have spoken language. So things like pointing, gesturing, a child who wants to be picked up, a child who wants to express happiness, a child who wants to note that someone's coming or going with a wave. Those kinds of behaviors are what I'm talking about when I say social communication and social engagement. Noticing what other kids around them are doing, wanting to just be hanging out near other people or near other kids, even if you're not going to interact directly with them. Enjoying things more. So a good example of what I'm talking about is there might be a child, you take them to the park and they're really excited about seeing something like an airplane flying overhead or an interesting bug crawling on the sidewalk. they're not going to just zero in on the thing. They're going to want to draw somebody else's attention in a way that says, hey, check this out. This is really cool. And if the other person, whether it's a parent or anybody, if they share the excitement, the child's enjoyment actually goes up.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing, it's not always about having to go and like get someone's attention and very explicitly say, hey, look at this thing. I think it's interesting. And I think you'll find it interesting too. It's about facial expressions and tones of voice, even if they're not saying words yet. It's about pointing to say, this is the thing I'm interested in, not something over there, this thing right here. And then getting that reaction that actually grows the pleasure. And so when we see a child who's not doing that kind of sharing, in a sense, it seems like that maybe their enjoyment of the activity is fine. They're still enjoying whatever it is they're doing, but it doesn't give it that opportunity to grow and build. Because if I share something I'm excited about with you, you might in turn share something that I didn't even know I was going to be excited about. And wow, check that out. Now I can learn that too. And we can have this back and forth even without language. And so that's an example of what it actually looks like for a toddler to have that kind of social engagement.
Absolutely. And those skills cascade is that if you're kind of in your own world, is that you have no reason to want to develop no reason to develop a lot of those social engagement sort of skills. So
Right.
once you start opening doors, more and more inputs start to come in from the outside world. But what you were describing as a parent, all those things are intrinsically reinforcing. Like, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I want. I want my child to bring me into their world. I really want to be a part of that. So historically, I would imagine is that parents were that gateway for being able to identify anything that they saw as, atypical, but we're not all equipped for that. We don't know what is supposed to happen. We don't have comparative samples. But you developed and you were part of the development of the MChat tool. And this is something that I see is that the AMA endorses for screening, APA, the CDC is saying, this is something that is very helpful in being able to kind of start that process. And pediatricians now are that's part of their protocol. Like, I should be screening on a regular basis. Can you give us some background on what that MChat is? Because right now it's a bunch of letters for us as we're listening, but what is the MChat and how does it support the early recognition or screening to be able to continue an evaluation process?
Right. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that now it's become one of those acronyms that's just out there. But let me start by saying what it actually stands for. It stands for the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers. And the modified happened because we modified a British tool that was called the Chat. And we basically wanted to give a tool to both parents and caregivers, but also pediatric and other healthcare professionals to help them identify when a child might benefit from a closer look by a specialist. And the idea of screening is you cast a broad net, and then you figure out who fits within that net that you can narrow down and look more closely at. So we're all very familiar with other kinds of screening, right? So at a certain age, you have breast cancer screening, you have colon cancer screening, you have lots of vision screening, hearing screening, lots of other kinds of screening. And one of the biggest challenges with autism is we don't yet have that reliable and usable biomarker. So you can't get a quick blood test or a scan that says definitively you do or you don't have this condition. Autism is defined behaviorally, and so we rely on noticing behaviors. Now, when you think about children under the age of 3, most of them don't see a wide range of professionals, but hopefully all children go and get well child checkups with a pediatric or family care kind of healthcare professional, a pediatrician, a nurse practitioner, those kinds of professionals. The challenge is it's not so easy to see symptoms of autism in a brief, very busy visit. And I think I had heard recently that the average pediatrician spends about 8 minutes doing
Mm-hmm.
an incredibly long list of things in a well-child visit. And it's not so obvious the way not walking by the time you're 1 or 1.5 years old would be very obvious in a checkup. We're talking about really foundational social engagement and social communication skills, but ones that might not manifest in a scenario where the child has already associated this visit with people stick sharp things in me and it doesn't feel good. So they're not really at their most social and their most engaged. And so one of the critical aspects of tools like the MChat is it relies on parents to tell us how their child usually behaves. Parents really are the experts on their own child, even if, as you mentioned earlier, they don't necessarily have the context to know what normative development looks like at each and every, developmental milestone. They know their child. And so we ask them to think about how their child usually behaves and answer a set of very straightforward yes, no questions. And folks, one of the biggest complaints I get is, why can't we have more choices? People don't like to say yes or no. They want to say something in between. And we actually piloted an in between, and everybody gravitates towards the in between response. So we press people to think about the usual behavior. Is it a yes or is it a no? And so items on the MChat include questions like, is your child interested in other children? Does your child point? And there's two different kinds of points. There's the point to like, I want that thing and I can't reach it, so help me. And then there's the kind of point of an, ooh, look. And so we now give examples when we, excuse me, when we revised the MChat. We did, the original MChat was in 1999. The MChat revised with the structured follow-up more carefully incorporated into the tool. So the MChat RF, it's a long acronym, but that's where we are. Give some examples so that parents do understand the kinds of things we're asking about, and it helps them to know the developmental level. So the question about interest in other children, we used to get a lot of parents who would say no, and when we would talk to them to find out what their child is or isn't doing, they would say things like, when I take him to the playground, he doesn't go up and play with the other kids. He wants to go and do his own thing. Sometimes he'll be near them, but he doesn't really want to play with them. Well, at 18 months, that's developmentally appropriate. We want children to notice other kids, want to be near them, but not yet expect them to always engage. And so by adding some examples, when we did the revised version of the MChat, we were hoping to help parents kind of get that what to expect at this age kind of context to give us more accurate answers. And so the first set of questions, the MChat Revise has 20 yes/no questions. Parents just go through, they could circle it on a piece of paper. They can now do it on electronic devices. And their pediatric healthcare professional should look at the score and know automatically, does it need some additional follow-up or not? And then we have a set of structured follow-up questions for kids who are in that kind of moderate likelihood of autism range to get more clarity. So we can find out, okay, you say they're not interested in other kids, but let's dig in a little deeper. What do they do when you see other children in a store or a playground or wherever you are? And then better understand if the child is showing an autism symptom or not showing an autism symptom. And if their final score shows at least 2 behaviors that are indicative of autism, or if their original MChat shows so many that you don't need to go through each one and clarify, then the next action item is immediately refer that child and family. So the delay in making the initial referral because people aren't sure, is it really autism? You don't have to be sure. The point of a screener is figure out what set of children should get a closer look. And so the goal is do the screener. Right now, as you mentioned earlier, the American Academy of Pediatrics has been recommending now since 2006 and 7, screen every single child at the 18-month checkup and the 24-month checkup. Screen everyone. Don't be selective or you'll miss children. And then the second piece is, if the MChat score suggests a referral, don't delay. Don't wait to see if the child catches up. Refer immediately. And we actually recommend referring both for a diagnostic evaluation and for early intervention services. Because here in the US, every child who shows some developmental delays should be eligible for IDEA Part C early intervention even before they have a diagnosis. Now, the diagnosis helps direct folks about what kinds of interventions might be most effective and what kinds of intensity, what types of treatments, et cetera, but get started even before you have that formal diagnosis, especially in this day and age where there's a serious waitlist crisis and people are not able to get that diagnosis right away. And so the idea is screen everyone, follow up when needed, and don't delay on the referrals. And that is really not just what the MCHAT is, but how it's intended to be used.
Yeah, and having that linear path for pediatricians has to have really increased the access to care for so many kids. Is that I could see somebody, if they didn't have something objective to look at, to be able to guide that, to want to say, well, let's wait and see. Let's just see how this is going to kind of how development's going to turn out versus having something a little bit more objective to look at and then have a pathway moving forward, which should give more confidence that, that's the first step. Now let's explore deeper. Do you see this screening almost as, it gives a little bit of understanding, but then it's also that guide to say, all right, well, now we got some medical necessity saying, let's get some further psychological evaluation. Let's get diagnostic testing started so that it's saying, yes, we finished this first part. Let's immediately start the second part. Let's not have delays. Let's not have barriers put in by whether it's payers or whoever it may be, because we know now that some more evaluation needs to occur.
I think in the ideal world, what you're describing is exactly how it goes, but I'm not sure that that's how it's working in most cases, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that whether or not they have an MCHAT score accompanying it will speed a referral. And unfortunately, what the research is showing is that although screening is actually quite widespread now compared to 10 or 20 years ago, acting on those positive screens is lagging. And many, many professionals are not interpreting it. And so I can't imagine if I went to the doctor for my annual checkup and she took my blood pressure and she said, your blood pressure is like 200 over, 120 or 150. I don't even know what a really bad blood pressure is, but you get the idea. And she's like, we're going to watch that. Come back in 6 months and we'll see if it's still high. If I knew anything, or even if I didn't know anything, if I went home and Googled, what does a blood pressure, blah, blah, blah mean? I would be pretty frustrated that my primary didn't immediately refer me to say, hey, we got to bring this down. This is not in the healthy range. And so I'm flabbergasted in a way that folks have a tool and they're not using it. And it's not triggering an alarm bell that when you have a tool that says something is different about this child's development, you're not immediately acting on it. But I think it's a whole host of things, including frustration with a system that's not really built to meet all children's needs. And one of my arguments back is we need to demonstrate the gap in what services exist and what the needs are to start to close that gap. So I fully sympathize with the frustrations that both caregivers and professionals experience when they see a child who's in need of supports and they're just nowhere to be found. But I think not identifying the child in the first place doesn't change that. If we instead can highlight this requirement that we do better to serve our kids' needs, then we can start to fill the gap. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. And you shouldn't limit information, limit resources, limit awareness simply because you have a lack of adequacy in the number of providers or the lack of resources that are available financially. We should still all know and understand so that we can start to do our own diligence on how to make things work. Is that oftentimes we rest on our laurels unless we truly understand a problem. And then we finally get motivated and we have nowhere to go with it. But
there is somewhere to go, though. We just have to highlight what the next steps are to help
Absolutely.
this unfold. And I also want to just mention the huge disparities we see in access to care and access to services. The MCHAT and other standardized tools, they close those gaps. They lessen the disparities if every child is screened the same and all screens are interpreted the same, and then the referrals are made. Where we see disparities increasing is when folks rely on judgment. And then if you go to a pediatric professional who's more in the know or better connected, maybe you get in. Or if you're a parent who has the resources to go figure out on your own what the next steps are, then you get it and somebody else doesn't. And so the standardization actually has been shown to reduce the disparities. And so we need more than ever to rely on our tools that look at everybody as a population.
Yeah, and I think that by making this a standard process, like you said, has already occurred with the American Academy of Pediatrics, where they're saying this should be a norm. This shouldn't be a one-off that we're doing this. Every child deserves this same screening, this same opportunity to be able to recognize something early enough to make a change. I think that that's exactly how you start to serve everybody equally. Is since you brought it up, is the MChat, is it culturally responsive in the way that the questions are asked and the way that is it getting to the root of numerous different populations?
It is, and I have to say, this is not from only my work, but people around the world have been studying the MChat. I should mention that it is a copyrighted tool, so people can't go and change it and still call it the MChat. But we made a choice years ago to make it freely available when people want to use it for clinical, educational, and research purposes. So people only need to get a license if they're using it in a commercial way. And so companies that want to incorporate it into a product, they will pay fees, but other folks can go and download it and use it. And the place to go and find out more about it is mchatscreen.com. It's very low tech because I'm not a web developer and this is not my full-time job, but it's available, and there's more than 50 translations on the website. And we do caution folks that when we post a translation, it doesn't mean that we've vetted it or that we've validated it. But many of the translations actually have been validated. And there are some research papers now that look at how the MChat is performing in many different cultures around the world. And it's not perfect. There are some items that are affected by different cultures. But many of the items seem to be universal indicators that a child would benefit from a closer look. And we're really excited about that. And at the same time, there's always more work to be done. And so we're always looking at strategies to make sure that it's not just more accessible, but also ensuring that it's really relevant to people all across the world.
Yeah, but I mean, you think through any sort of, I guess, structure is that foundation has to be solid. It sounds like right now the MChat has made it so that the foundation is pretty solid. It's something that's available to everybody. It should be interpretable by everybody, and it should give results that are going to be beneficial for everybody. And then as you start building up and bring in those other diagnostic tools, we hope that they do the same. But it sounds like you've created a really good foundation to be able to start from to help somebody through that process. But imagine parents and even pediatricians at times still get overwhelmed with having to do the screener and then also having to give feedback on the screener. Is it sometimes the interpersonal part of it that keeps that next step from happening, from going to screening to diagnostics or treatment?
That's a really interesting question. I think you're right. I think doing the screener itself is not so overwhelming. The hardest part sometimes is when a parent really wants to say, well, sometimes, and they have to pick a yes or a no. And in those cases, I would guide those parents back to think about the usual behavior. If you've only seen it once or twice, don't say yes. And that's true of both the questions where a yes response indicates increased likelihood of autism, and also where a yes response indicates less likelihood of autism. Think about usual and not just once yeah, once I saw him point. Think about whether he usually will point at all the things around that are interesting. And so I would say take it one step at a time is the best advice that I can give. Start with just the basic yes, no questions. If you're a healthcare professional, try and carve out the time to ask those extra questions for the kids who do score in that moderate likelihood of autism range. You know, in general pediatric practice, this is less than 10% of the patients who need those extra questions. So it's not like every single visit is going to double in length.
Mm-hmm.
I would say to the professionals, get out there and try to help your families find where to go next. You know, try to give them targeted referrals in your area, even if they have to get on some wait lists, get on them, because sometimes you get called in earlier from, you know, a canceled appointment, and sometimes you get on 2 or 3 wait lists, and then you release the appointments when you get one. From a parent standpoint, I would say try to find things you can work on at home while you're waiting. So try to use every opportunity throughout your day to engage your child and help pull them into your world. So if they're not naturally bringing things to show you, do lots of opportunities throughout the day where you're showing them things you're excited about and then giving them a chance to explore it. So planting little toys or objects, or just going out in the yard and seeing what you can find. It can be a flower or a bug or a piece of paper that blew from somewhere else, where you just look at what color it is and you crumple it up and see what it feels like. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be going to classes or events. So this shouldn't be something that people are constrained by if they don't have the financial resources. And try to turn every moment into a learning opportunity. So simple things like dressing your child. I know some days you have to get the clothes on and get out the door, but if you have a little more time, do silly things. Do things like take the pants and start to put on the child's arm instead of on their leg, and then exaggerate. Oh my gosh, that's not right. What are we going to do? Maybe the child will pick it up and pull it off and show you that it has to go on their leg. Even if they need help pulling up the pants, they're now engaging. Maybe the child will imitate it because they saw your reaction and they want you to do, oh my gosh, all over again. So maybe they'll take it off and then they'll put it back on their arm, even though they know it's wrong. And so taking a very simple thing, everybody has to dress their kiddo. Taking a very simple daily activity like getting dressed, eating, bath time, brushing teeth, all of those things that we do all the time, and turning it into not one, but 50 or 100 learning opportunities will help your child while you're still waiting for that formal diagnosis and for the formal early intervention. I really hesitate a little bit because it's not parents' job to carry the burden to do all of this themselves. We should be, as a society, providing those intervention supports, providing those trained therapists, rather than having parents try to wing it at home. And at the same time, as much as we can do as parents while we're waiting for those services to get into place, while we're out there advocating for our child and saying, hey, I need support, I need services, there's umpteen things that you can do at home in your daily routine that will help try to bring the child along and start to foster some of these social engagement and social communication skills that may not be coming naturally to a child who's on the spectrum.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful advice. When I think kind of through conceptually what you're saying is that if I go through every single opportunity with my child, no matter what I'm doing, and I think engagement, 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 is that now while I'm waiting, I'm doing everything I can for my child. I think the hard part sometimes is being patient enough to realize I'm not going to be successful all the time. And even that small win of seeing a small engagement, I joined my child in their world and they gave me this feedback back, probably gives that parent that much that needed spark to kind of keep it going and keep excited. But I think
And you
that's great.
pointed out, yeah, sorry, you pointed out one really crucial thing that I didn't say out loud, which is following the child's lead is so important here. So I may think that the, kite somebody is flying is really cool and want the child to look at it, but they may be like, not so important to me. If you can figure out what's interesting your child and figure out how to join them in it, you're far more likely to be successful more of the time than if you're always trying to pull them to what you're interested in. So, putting out 2 or 3 choices of whatever toys, activities, plasticware in the kitchen, anything that you might see what they're interested in, and let them guide first. And then you join. Then once you've joined them in their interests, it opens the door for you to add something new. So you can add, funny sounds and facial expressions. You can add clapping or other gestures. You can add turn taking. You can add playing with it a new way. But starting with their interest is actually really, really important.
Yeah, and don't we all want to be that way? I mean, we're all more engaging when somebody's talking about something that we're passionate about, or that really is enticing to us. When you're talking, and you brought up once again just the idea of this gap period. It exists. There is oftentimes a gap between being able to identify a need and being able to service a need. Um, and it's not always the family's job, but the family wants to be empowered during that time period to be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm doing what I can, and I feel educated enough to be successful helping my child during this time period. Even though I'm not a clinician, I'm still a great parent. um, what sort of resources do you recommend where they could learn from that? Because it sounds like you've developed this wonderful tool for screening, is that there is treatment that is out there, but not always immediate. Do you have recommendations on resources, or where people could go to learn some of the skills that you just described?
Yeah, that's such a big question. I can't, give you all of the resources, but a few things that I would say. First of all, I would look to finding your village. So don't try to do it alone. This is true of just about everything that we come across in our lives that's at all challenging. If you're isolated and alone, it's overwhelming and you feel like there's no way you can manage it. And if you find those people who are part of your village, it becomes more manageable. In addition to people like your pediatric healthcare professional, your daycare teacher, folks like that, there are parent support groups like Parent to Parent out there that can help you not feel so alone and help point you in the right direction. There are definitely some books out there. Some of them are getting a little outdated, but they still have a lot of really helpful content, even if some of the language has shifted in the way we talk about autism. Two that I very often recommend to parents of young children who might have autism or who just got a diagnosis of autism are the Activity Kit for Babies and Toddlers by my longtime, very close colleague, Deb Fine, and Lynn Brennan and Marianne Barton. They really spell out for parents things that you can do at home that foster this kind of social communication and social engagement. The other book is called Early Start for Your Child with Autism. And again, you can still look at it even if you don't know if it's autism or not. There's useful things, and it will not in any way be problematic if your child doesn't have an autism diagnosis for you to be fostering this kind of play and social connection. And that Early Start book is written by Sally Rogers, Jerry Dawson, and Lori Vismara. So these are books that are obviously, they cost money. You have to buy them, but lots of libraries will carry books like this, and you could go and you can read it, you could take it out, you can go back to it 3 months later and focus on a different chapter this time. So the hope is that families everywhere could get access to these kinds of strategies and these kinds of guides. But the reality is parents also can trust their gut. If every parent is an expert on their child, and if you have an inkling of what might get your child happy and excited, run with it. And while they're happy and excited is a great opportunity to help them engage and help them learn. And so I know we all get bogged down by our daily routines and so many things we have to do and errands we have to run and we have to prepare meals and we have to do all of the things. But making sure that we take time to just play and have fun is another piece to this, so that parents don't feel like they're always thinking like, what do I need to do next? How am I going to engage this? Have fun. And if you're having fun, you're creating learning opportunities. And I think that's one more really important nugget. Parents are not supposed to become therapists where they're just goal-directed work all the time. But if they're getting in there and finding those moments of joy with their child, chances are they're giving them learning opportunities.
Yeah. And just that success of enjoying that time with your child is probably going to create a stronger bond, stronger relationship, so that as you start developing some of those other skills, whether it's that joint engagement and those other pieces as they start developing, you already have that personal connection, that where that your child is wanting you to be a part of it versus that work. If you're always saying work, 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 no fun, your child's gonna potentially start avoiding those engagements, and it's not going to be as rewarding for them. So we've talked a lot about, even just the research that's out there. There's just so much more research that needs to be done within the field. And I feel like it's changed already over the last 30, 40 years, is that every time I open up a new article, I'm seeing something different. And it's making the field stronger, and it's making us go outside of our comfort zone to do better care. What do you see as far as some of the advances in autism research that are either on the horizon or that we need to start looking into, that are really going to empower families and empower individuals?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this kind of question because I think that there are some that are very practical. There are some that are more theoretical, and they're all important. So from a practical standpoint, a lot of the work I do, one of the things we're really proud of at our Autism Institute here at Drexel is that many of our research findings have real world impact today in real time. And there isn't that 20-year pipeline from a scientific discovery to actually mattering in somebody's life. And that's because we do work in the community, and community partnerships and engagement is an integral part of the kind of public health science that many of us practice. So there are a lot of practical things. We need research to back strategies to shorten those wait lists, so parents spend less time wondering what to do, where to turn, how to get help, and are more quickly directed to what will help them now. And so that's kind of from a practical standpoint, something that I'm really looking forward to. We're trying to do some of this work ourselves here at Drexel, and I know many of my colleagues are also tackling this really important issue. There's the question of biomarkers and whether there will be, a quick test to definitively say, yes, it's autism, or no, it's not. Unfortunately, I feel like we still have a ways to go on that. There are some promising biomarkers, but they need to be further validated, and then figuring out how to bring them to the public is a real challenge. So I hear sometimes from pediatricians or other healthcare professionals that it's hard to fit in doing an MChat in a visit. Now, the MChat takes parents maybe 5 minutes to fill out, and it takes the professional maybe 30 seconds to score. And if it's hard to fit that in, it's going to be hard to fit in something else, and also more costly to fit in something else than a quick 20 question yes no survey that the parents can do in the waiting room or before they're being seen. So I think that biomarkers have promise, but we need to be really confident that they're doing what they're intended to do before we try to move them to market and put them out there, so that we're not building up hope that we can't quite actualize just yet. And then the third thing I would say is we need to listen to autistic adults. When the field of autism first started, there wasn't much attention paid to what people with autism thought and what they experienced. And I know that there's a lot of controversy in certain areas, but I think the important thing is to get folks to sit down together and talk through it. And so I know that there are many great minds working on this, and there are autistic self-advocacy groups now and autistic scientists now that are bringing this to the forefront. But I think, someone like me, I'm not on the spectrum myself. I need to make sure that I'm hearing autistic voices and incorporating that into the strategies for both our science and our practice in a way that honestly was not on my radar 20 years ago when I started this work.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that a big part of social validity is that if I'm not helping somebody in the way that they want to be helped, then am I really doing anything that's going to be beneficial? I really need to look at how do I take the science and apply it to the problem as it's seen and what that perspective is, and try and make sure that I'm meeting the need. And it's such a broad
Right.
discussion, is that like skill development is like, there's barriers. I need to fill those gaps. But then there's things like changing stereotypical behavior and things that aren't necessarily always interfering in somebody's life, where it's like, well, do I focus on that? Well, I'm hearing from the autistic community at times, no, that shouldn't be a priority. So as a
Right.
clinician, I need to understand that.
Agreed. And I do think we have to couch it with a little bit of a caveat, because if you waited for a toddler to be ready to learn everything, we'd have a whole lot of kids not wanting to
Mhm.
learn how to dress themselves or how to be toilet trained or any of the things that aren't really fun, and we kind of like
Mhm.
that somebody else is willing to do it for us. So it doesn't necessarily extend to we have to always follow the toddler's lead on what they want to learn, but
Mhm.
the strategies we use to engage them and teach them, that's where we need to listen to the autistic voices and make sure that we are, like you said, focusing on the things that will build their toolkit so they
Mhm.
have the autonomy, they have the ability to make their life choices, not to make them conform to what other kids are doing or thinking or saying. So if a child really
Absolutely.
likes doing some kind of repetitive movement with their hands, it's not hurting anyone. It's not stopping
Mhm.
their learning. So I think the important question is to ask, is a behavior critical for them to learn and grow and develop? And those are the behaviors that we really want to figure out how to teach in an effective,
Mhm.
meaningful way, and not just to change the way somebody looks or acts to fit some idea of how kids should be.
Yeah, no, and sometimes it's a lot harder work as a clinician to be able to do all that, but that's what you should be doing. That's the right care. And what you were talking about the biomarkers, it's always intriguing to me is the overlap of saying, okay, say we do get there with biomarkers. I think that the real win is when that starts informing clinical care, and it starts informing, what are the components? How can we tailor this to either diet, medicine, behavioral treatment, priority of goals, community inclusion? How do we take that information and use it in such a powerful way? But it sounds like we're still way off from there. And what we should be doing is what you are right now, where you're refining a tool, making it more efficient, easier to use for pediatricians to get treatment moving, to get things started, and then empowering the community to continue to be able to evolve treatment while we're waiting for further scientific discovery. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing right now. Where can people read about some of the work that you're doing at Drexel, and some of the and even get more information on the MChat tool so they can better inform themselves?
Great. Well, thank you for asking that. I will say our website is not always the most up to date at Drexel. I'm so busy doing science and leading my team that I don't always give the attention that I should to our website. But we do have a place on our website to join our mailing list, and we do send out quarterly newsletters so we don't bombard you. We have some really nice reports from prior years that you can also look at on our website to get a clear understanding of what it is we do and what it means to be an autism institute that focuses on public health science. And I should know it right off the bat. I think it's drexel.edu/autism institute, but for sure, if you Google it, you will get to us. For the MChat, I mentioned our website earlier. It's a homemade website, not nearly as sophisticated as it could be, but mchatscreen.com is where you can learn about the mchat and download the tool itself. Reach out to us if you have questions about wanting a license. We do try to list articles that are using the mchat, and it's pretty amazing that there's more than 150 articles now that have used the mchat in research, which is so gratifying to see that other people are out there contributing to this important area of science. And last, I would say people can reach out to me directly. So you can email me at drobbins@drexel.edu. You can just look me up on the website. That's an easier alias than my official Drexel email address. But I do try to at least punt questions to folks on my team if I can't answer them all myself. And I do welcome engagement from folks anywhere in the world.
Well, thank you again, Dr. Robbins, for coming on and chatting with us today. And I think it really highlights that there is a very clear path to care and for knowledge. And I think that as long as we're trusting that path, we can open up so many opportunities for so many families. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.